we have these mainstream leaders, the so-called billionaires of the world, mostly men, and they are influencing others how to be. And they are highly narcissistic. They lack empathy, compassion, and they don't think about others. And we want to stay away from that type of leadership as much as possible. Right now, we are at a place where empathy has been socialized enough, where we understand that we are supposed to be empathetic. But in order for you to actually come across empathetic, it requires self-awareness. It requires self-awareness of how you are communicating to someone who does not share the same knowledge as you do. So I'm not going to just talk about empathetic leaders, but this also can be utilized as an empathetic teacher, an empathetic parent, an empathetic friend, to stop assuming that the other person will understand you, your usual way of communication. So let's double click on this, and this is what the next couple of minutes will be all about. And this is super important because nobody talks about that. We need to stop assuming that there's only one type of brain. We need to stop assuming that when we say vague things, as I'll use a very practical example because I am in that field. We all know that when we storytell a website to an ad to a podcast, we have to keep in mind the end user. How is the end user receiving your message? And our tendency is to think that other people think like we do. And right there, there's a lack of empathy for others. Because to assume that everybody will understand what you are saying just because you think it's clear, it's wrong. Most of the time, people can be just as creative, just as logical, just as intelligent as you, and have a neurodivergent style of thinking. So what makes sense to you may not make sense to someone else, and what makes sense to someone else may not make sense to you. So this is where we want to be as specific as possible when we communicate feedback. We also want to have that empathetic communication in mind with our closest relationships. If someone does not understand what you are saying, let's not assume that it's because the person doesn't like you. It's never that. But understand that the person does not understand your way of communicating. And that's why the person is not receiving the message that you are trying to give. So when we start taking a lot more accountability and responsibility to how we are coming across, now that is putting the end user first. And change your style to a particular person or audience. And it's super important that people understand the purpose of empathy is to be helpful, is to be of service. And if you were not, that means that you have to try it again differently and you have to change your ways. So being empathetic, it's thinking less about yourself and more about other people. If you are an empath, please surround yourself with more empaths. And this is my last message because it's hard to be an empath in this world where most people do not think like you. They don't think about others. And therefore, if you are in an environment or in a group of friends especially, where you're the only empath, then you will always be very understanding and be able to soothe everyone's feelings and distress, and you will never have anyone to do the same to you. And this is where you can become a wounded empath because you also deserve empathy. So to the empaths out there, know your worth of being an empath. Know how special you are, because most empaths are extremely humble and extremely kind. And they spend their entire life trying to teach others on how to be more selfless. But here's the thing. If you want to survive, because a lot of empaths end up becoming addicted to substance and they find other coping mechanisms to survive, or they die early in their life, it's so important that you set boundaries, but also you look for other empaths, because when you do that, it's healing. It's healing for you, and you also deserve the empathy that you give to other people back to you. And lastly, a fundamental key for empathy is self-awareness. And without self-awareness, you will never learn empathy. Never. Empathy cannot be taught, but empathy can be found within yourself. And only if you want to. Nobody can force you to do that. So it's something that each person has to want to develop within themselves. Nobody can do it for you. Nobody can convince you to become more empathetic if you don't want to be empathetic. Because we all can. It's within ourselves, within everyone. But if you have a critical mind towards feelings, if you are judgmental, that means that you're extremely judgmental towards your own feelings. That means that you already have this prejudice against other people's emotions, including yourself. So you will never be able to be empathetic to anyone if you don't realize that feelings, emotions are all valid. And in order to stay human and not zombies, or like my daughter likes to say, not being coma, you have to be in touch with your feelings. You have to be in touch with your emotions. So begin with that.